Now, everybody knows the Beethoven Fifth. Everybody knows. I mean, there's a book. Actually, I was asked to write the book. Fortunately, I turned it down. But there's a wonderful book called The First Four Notes. That's all it's called. It doesn't say anything else. It's all it needs. Everybody knows, Beethoven Fifth, of course. There they are. Those four notes are the most famous four notes in all of music. And some people actually know this as well. Well, what you're going to hear tonight is not what you think is Beethoven's Fifth. You're going to hear something quite different. And I'm very, very excited about that, because I believe that Beethoven actually wanted us to pay attention to his instructions. Not only the notes he wrote, and the dynamics he wrote, and the slurs he wrote, and the harmonies he wrote, but also the tempo he wrote. And we have very, very convincing evidence of that, because he said over and over again, I want my pieces to be played at the tempi that I have set, and this wonderful machine enables me to do that. And he was overjoyed, he was ecstatic when this machine, because he said, already in my own time, people are playing the wrong tempi. So what happened was that as he got further and further away from the source, it got more and more romantic. And people started thinking of this as very portentous. There's a wonderful recording of Stokowski. I'm not exaggerating. Beep, 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 beep. Beep, 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 beep. Right, that's how it begins. I mean, it's nothing to do with what Beethoven wrote. And in the war, you know, in England, they took that, bo, 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 bo. That was the sign of victory in the war in England. And it just got further and further away from Beethoven's original idea. And fate knocking on the door and all these ideas, very, very romantic. What Beethoven actually wrote was Allegro con brio, and then metronome mark 108. And that is so fast that many musicians simply say, well, that's ridiculous. He can't possibly have meant that. Well, I don't say that. I say he did mean that. And so that's what you're going to hear tonight. And it's very exciting. What comes out is, instead of ba, 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 is this. Excuse me for attacking you, but you were sitting in the front row here, so that was... So Beethoven meant that as an attack. He meant it as an attack on complacency, on the status quo, on hierarchy, on the way we always do things. He was shaking his fist like this at the world. Now, the world has tamed his music, because, you know, we drive in our fast cars, and if you're driving down the highway and Beethoven is played on the CD player, you might actually drive off the road. So when my recording came out, I got my company to write, actually they didn't do it, but I asked them to write on the disc, on the front, do not use while driving. But that's what you're going to hear. And it's incredibly exciting. I mean, it's and I'll tell you something very interesting. You know, we talked about this. Is that fast? No, isn't that interesting? You're going to hear that theme played faster probably than it's ever been played, but it doesn't sound fast. Why? Because if you take away the impulses, you get... And it doesn't sound fast at all. It's like if you're flying, and you're flying on land, and the land is going by very, very, very fast, and then you go into the Grand Canyon, suddenly everything seems very slow, but you're going the same speed. Because it's the perception of impulse is what we're talking about here. And you're going to have a fantastic time tonight, because sometimes the impulses are extremely strong, and sometimes, like when you get to the second theme, And you're used to hearing that, which actually sounds faster because there are more impulses. Isn't that fascinating? I mean, it's really a tremendously interesting thing that the perception of speed has nothing to do with the actual speed, has to do with how many impulses you feel. And so you're going to be regaled with that tonight in many, many ways. And one of the things that you'll feel with this driven, very fast tempi is, and incidentally, when he wrote the original manuscript, he wrote the word presto on the top of the manuscript. He then changed it to allegro con brio. I think the reason for that is there's so much incredible power and intensity that presto is not quite the right word, because that's a little bit too driven. But what you hear is tense, dramatic, overwhelming, annihilating. It's as if Beethoven is locked in combat with his demons in this piece. And his frenzy and his despair seem to grab us by the throat and give us no rest. And what he is asking us to do is experience what he has experienced as a man going deaf, a musician going deaf, and the desperation he felt at that experience. And this restless motive, ba, 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 even when the second theme, da, 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 dee, da, and you think there's some calm, but the cellos and basses go, ba, 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 ba. It won't let us rest. It won't let us rest. There's one momentary letting up, and it's a moment in which the oboe, our beloved Peggy Pearson, is left alone for a brief moment, and it's unforgettable. You won't forget it. She's just left entirely alone, and to do a tiny little cadenza, and it's so beautiful. He's shaking his fist at the world like that. But for that moment, that butterfly just rose up into the sky. It's the most tender. And nobody plays it. I wouldn't say nobody plays it as more beautifully. Nobody plays it as beautifully as Peggy. I've never heard it. It's just that wonderful, wonderful thing that we are so privileged in Boston to be, to have in our midst. So that's it. When you get to the end, you're annihilated. Now, what happens then is something really amazing, and I plead with you not to applause between the first movement and the second movement. And if you're sitting next to somebody tonight before the concert, just say, shh, no applause between the first and second movement, because if we get it right, we end on this C minor, and then the next movement begins in this key. Yeah, it was the most beautiful thing, because this lady was just sitting there like this, and I went, and she went, like that. And that's what it does to us, actually. The tonality itself causes a reaction, a physical reaction. And that's the beauty of it's a song of love. It's a beautiful song of love. And it's marked andante con moto, but on his manuscript, he wrote 2 extra words, which he eliminated. I'm not quite sure why he did. But he said, andante con moto, quasi minuetto, like a minuet. And then he gave us a tempo marking 92. And I'm sure you've never heard this piece played at 92. Excuse me. Usually played much slower. I was listening earlier today to a recording of Scholti. He was playing it at 62. It was absolutely unbelievable. I'll show you. And actually, here it is. That's... wonder people get bored with classical music. 92 is a dance. And then it's like a bow. And there's actually a moment where it actually is like a bow. The elegance of the classical bow. So this is a beautiful thing. Now I tell you what is very important here is that this theme comes 3 times, and each time it is a completely different timing. Same tempo. That's the first variation. And then the second variation is I can't play this on the the speed of the notes increases. So you have to do it at the same tempo in order to make that point. The people who play it in the very traditionally slow way get faster and faster each variation, which clearly is nonsense. Excuse me, I'm speaking on Beethoven's behalf. He used to get really angry with people who did stupid things like that. And so what you're going to hear is what he wanted, which was all in one tempo for the variations, the 3 of them. And it has a kind of a courtly dance. There's one other variation which is so beautiful in the winds in A flat minor. Isn't that lovely? I mean, it feels so naturally. Why don't people do that? I don't understand it. Anyway, it's beautiful. So that's why it matters that we get the right tempo and that it increases in speed of notes, not in actual tempo. In between those beautiful dances, there is another theme, and it also appears several times. It appears for the first time in the violins. And now here comes this theme. Now the trumpets play and the oboes that's in the key of C major. Now, I don't know if any of you who are not musicians can say, oh yes, that feels like C major. It's so open and so triumphant and so like a band kind of music. That's C major, but it dies away. It stops in the middle as if he doesn't have the energy to carry it through. Keep that in mind. So that's the other theme. Those 2 themes go back and forth. Joyful and triumphant, but cut off. And that's that's how the second movement is created. I want to point out one moment that is so magical that it's almost unbelievable that a composer could think of it. I can't actually demonstrate it. Last night I demonstrated it with the orchestra on Thursday, but I can only tell you about it. The cellos are playing this. They're doing like that, and the violas are playing. So there are two voices. Then the bassoons are going pum pim pum pi, pum pim pum pi with the clarinet. So that's four voices. The double basses are playing 2, 3, do, do, ti, ti, do, ti, do, rum, bum. Bum. So that's 5 voices, and then the second violins are going 2, 3, do, di, ti, di, ti, do, di. So that's 6 voices, and then there's one more voice, and it's the first violins, and they start by going di da 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 da, and they go ya da 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 da. That's the main theme elaborated, and there are 7 voices going simultaneously, and I wonder if you could just nudge her and see if she can hear, because I believe everybody can hear those 7 voices, and we've worked very hard to make sure that all the voices are heard. The first violins play too loud, they always do. You know, and I got them to play less. You know, it's like the person in the office who's always a little bit louder than everybody else. We got them to play very soft. So if you listen carefully, you can actually hear 7 voices, and it's kind of a miracle. And that's one of the wonders of Beethoven. It's impossible to believe. And then the third movement. Oh my goodness, third movement. Third movement, mysterious, ghostly, spectral shadows. Also a piece that is traditionally played much slower than Beethoven intended. It's one of the pieces that people say used to prove that Beethoven's tempi are nonsense. Because, for one thing, double basses can't be expected to play. No double bass player can play. Well, our bassists can do it. That's fantastic. But people say, and you'll see, it's so exciting when they finally get loose. It's rough and like a wild game of tag. It's so exciting. And there's safety in numbers, so there are 6 of them and all the cellos together. And they play it fantastically well. But the opening figure, which again is usually played very slowly, the reason I did that is because it's a shock. It's not only a sforzando, but it's a sforzando on a weak bar. Now that may sound very surprising to you, because how do we know which are strong and weak? Well, this is weak. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, 4 is supposed to be weak. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's Beethoven. He loves to play with our expectations. And we set up those expectations so the orchestra knows which bar they are in the phrase at every moment in the piece, in the performance. And I'll tell you why that's important. There was a performance here in the Conservatory many years ago, and one of my students, I had a class on Brown Hall, and I was talking about these things, about heavy bars and light bars and phrasing and how to organize, and she was playing flute in the Beethoven Fifth. I said, oh, what does he do? Does he do da 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 dee da da da, or da 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 dee da da da, or da da dee da 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 dee da, or da da dee da 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 dee da? And she said, I don't know, I'll check it out at the next rehearsal. So she came back the next rehearsal to the class, and she said, you know, he isn't doing anything at all. He's doing da 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 da. And I helped him. I went da da dee da da da, and the next time I went da da dee da da da, and the next time I went da da dee da 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 dee, and once I went da da dee da. He didn't take any notice at all. But we musicians have to decide what the heavy bars and what the light bars and what the shape of the phrases is. And what you're going to hear tonight is a performance in which every phrase has been identified. Now comes the transition. And there's a transition to the last movement that I have to tell you, the only word I can use to describe it is OMG. The trio, the scherzo disappears into kind of spectral amazement, shadow of itself, disembodied, pizzicatos, very, very soft. And then we land on a chord of A flat major with the and the timpani going boom, bum, 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 bum. You remember that the rhythm? Ba, 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 ba. And it's one of the great moments in music. It's totally original, it's unprecedented, it's uncanny, it lives in the world next to silence, ambiguity, A flat major chord that nobody expects. It's full of horror, fear. It's one of the most original moments in all symphonic music, unprecedented. And out of it comes an eerie melodic line in the violins. Those notes, and all very soft and very soft. And as it goes up, it wants to get louder, and he wants to get louder, but he doesn't allow it, he doesn't allow it, he doesn't allow it. It stays pianissimo, pianissimo. And right at the last moment, it makes a huge crescendo, and bim, 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 bum, 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 and that's the final movement. And that's one of the great moments in Western music. It's a release of ultimate joy, freed into the light after all the sorrow. And it's one of the most exhilarating moments, an outburst of C major. And for that moment, he doesn't have enough instruments in the orchestra. So he brings in 3 trombones who've been sitting there since the beginning of the concert, not playing a note. In fact, they've been sitting there for the last 150 years, waiting to play. It's the first time that the trombones appeared in a symphony, and it is the most glorious moment. He also introduces a piccolo and a contrabassoon, and it is thrilling, and it is majestic, and it's unalloyed joy. And I'll tell you something really interesting. Most people, most conductors, take the last movement faster than Beethoven marked it. And these are the same people who say Beethoven's metronome must have been broken because all the tempi are too fast. So that takes care of that argument, because this movement is traditionally played considerably faster than you're going to hear it tonight. And the reason is they play it in 2 and it's written in 4. So you'll see me conducting quite a lot in 4, and I think it has tremendous impact at his tempo and not playing for excitement. And I have an experiment for you. I'd like to join this experiment. During this movement, see if you can bring up gloomy, self-absorbed thoughts. Try. Just see whether you can. And see whether you can hold them. What you will probably feel is a tremendous sense of community and of love and inclusion and possibility. Now imagine, Beethoven was deaf, he was alone, he had no companion, and he was very ill. And yet out of that darkness, he taught us something profound. He taught us that never mind how despairing and difficult the situation is, there is always a pathway to triumph. Always. In every piece of Beethoven, there is a move towards triumph, except for one piece, and you just heard about it, Coriolan Overture. It's the only tragic piece he ever wrote, because he was describing a suicide, a death. But in every other piece, he moves out of the deepest sorrow and anguish, and there's always a pathway to triumph. That is the lesson that Beethoven has taught us, and it's a universal message, most powerfully spoken in the Ninth Symphony, which has become a universal hymn for possibility. And I said last night, on Thursday night, to the young people, to my teenage grandchildren, that young people have experienced these feelings of drama and tragedy and being scared and the mysterious and the unpredictable. And they've also the experience of coming into light after darkness. And sunshine as an emotional experience is something that actually all young people have experienced, a weight lifted off their shoulders. And that is what Beethoven is talking about. And I don't think such extraordinary joy as expressed in the final movement of the Fifth Symphony, I think it's unique to that piece and to that experience. I don't think you will ever be able to find anything more fully expressed and fulfilled than the sense of joy that is in the final movement of the final movement of the Fifth Symphony. The very end, there's a tiny coda, and the coda takes us to one jot on the metronome higher than he's been in the first movement. It's the same music, pa-pa-pa-pum, pa-pa-pa-pum, but instead of 108, he writes 112. Isn't that amazing? I mean, he's so excited that he wants us to play even faster. And the end has been mocked because it goes on and on and on, tonic and dominant, tonic and dominant. You think, when is this piece going to end? But if you've been through the whole experience, it needs that amount of time to weight down this fantastic flying machine, which is the Fifth Symphony. And I don't think you'll feel it's excessive, especially not at the tempo that he told us to do it, which is what we'll do tonight.